Let's make the easiest fit and flare dress. This is the sewing tutorial for the Bella Frock, which you can find at lydianaomi.com or Etsy. This is a jersey dress, so make sure that your stretch percentage is 70%. If less than 70%, size up. If more than 70%, size down. To learn how to find stretch percentage, view my short tutorial linked in the description. Because the fabric I'm using today is more like a 50 to 60% stretch, I'm sewing a size 10 instead of my usual 8. So far, I've sewn this garment in 3 different specialty fabrics, which have required sizing up due to their lower stretch percentage. So don't limit yourself when you're selecting fabric. Make sure you read the Read First file, it will fill in any information gaps. Yes, seam allowance is included in the pattern and it's 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter everywhere. You can sew this with a serger and use a zigzag stitch on your domestic machine, or you can completely use only your zigzag stitch. I use a zigzag with a width of 3 and a length of 2. We're going to start with the back seams. So place the center back seams of the facing right sides together and zigzag or overlock them at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm using a zigzag today. If you end up using a 4-thread overlocker that creates a 1/4 inch seam, you're going to have to cut off 1/8 as you sew. So just keep that in mind. Place the center back seam of the back dress right sides together and match up the notches, and then sew together. When you press these seams, you want to press them in the same direction so that when they are facing wrong sides together, the seam allowance is laying in opposite directions, providing less bulk. Now that that's done, you're going to place the front and back facing shoulder seams right sides together and zigzag or overlock together. Then you can place the front and back dress shoulder seams right sides together and zigzag or overlock them. To complete the neckline, you're going to place the facing and the dress necklines right sides together and zigzag or overlock together. The seam allowances should be alternating, so make sure that they're laying in different directions so that it reduces bulk. After you've sewn it together, you're going to want to understitch the seam allowance to the facing with a zigzag stitch. That's not optional. You want a zigzag stitch so that it will stretch. That means we're going to have the seam allowance towards the facing side of the garment, and we're going to stitch really close to that original seam. And that will keep the facing from popping out when you're wearing it. Now, if you've sewn the original seam with a zigzag stitch instead of an overlock stitch, you're going to want to clip the curved areas of the leftover seam allowance, just so that it lays flatter. Then you can turn everything to the inside, and using a little scrap of velvet, I'm going to press it in place. Velvet has a pile on it, so they're the little fibers sticking up. And you don't want to flatten that pile with the iron, so using a scrap facing pile to pile helps to not crush the fabric. But even so, try to use a little more steam than pressure, and you'll have a better result. On to the armholes. So with the facing folded to the inside now, we are going to line up the facing and the dress armhole edges and sew close to the edge with a zigzag stitch. And you might find in the shoulder area that the facing wants to kind of move over a little bit, and that's totally fine. You can just trim that off. Now that that's done, we're going to line up the sleeves to the armhole right sides together, matching the notches so the center notch aligns with the shoulder seam, the single notch to the front, and the double notches to the back. Then you're going to zigzag or overlock it. And that's the sleeves done. Now we get to do the side seams. So place front and back right sides together, aligning the sides of the sleeves and the side seams of the dress, and then zigzag or overlock together from sleeve hem to dress hem. And make sure that you match all the notches as well. And here I am again alternating the seam allowance direction at the underarm to reduce any bulk. And after sewing this seam, you can press it to one side. Take your sleeve hem and cut to your seam 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter from the hem, and alternate the direction of the seam allowance to fold it to the inside of the dress. Pin or clip in place, and sew with a zigzag or a straight stitch along the edge, leaving a small gap open to feed through our elastic. And make sure to backstitch at the start and end so that it doesn't come apart when you're trying to feed through the elastic. You can use the chart to get your elastic measurement, but I'd rather you measure your wrist, then add 1 to 2 inches or 2.5 to 5 centimeters for ease. And then you can use a safety pin to feed through the elastic. And once you come out on the other side, you're going to want to overlap the ends by about 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. And I like to use a little piece of paper to wrap around it to keep it in place and get it into the machine. And then I just sew it together with a zigzag. I wrapped it one too many times, don't know why I did that, but you can just tear away as much of the paper as you can. Next, pull the elastic inside the channel, and then sew up the gap, avoiding catching the elastic. It doesn't look very pretty. You could definitely do a straight stitch on this since we're gathering it, but you won't even see it at all. Now we're pretty much done here. Because this is a velvet, I don't want to fold over the hem. It just won't look as nice, and since this velvet doesn't unravel, I cut the hem smoothly with a rotary cutter and then it's good to go. But if you have a different type of fabric that you want to finish, you can just fold it over 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter and zigzag or double needle hem along the edge to finish it. Well, that's the Bella Frock complete. If you'd like to share your work with me, I'd love if you use the hashtag BellaFrock and tag me at Lydia Naomi Studio so that I can share it.